All right, so I'm here doing another Fireside Chat. I've been picking it up lately. I got one done in New York last week. Obviously, I mentioned I slacked off for the summer, but it's go time in September again. So this one is with a good partner of ours at Microsoft and Azure, and it's with Steve Tanaka. So we're going to have a chat about all kinds of things, probably more partnerships and business stuff than some of the tech stuff we talk about. But nonetheless, we'll see what this goes. So maybe Steve, introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Microsoft and your history.
Thank you, Kyle. So 20 years at Microsoft, which I never thought I was going to be here 20 years at Microsoft. But Microsoft being the company it is, I just think it's been a great and fabulous ride doing so many different roles. My current role is I'm actually a CTO of our one commercial partner team. That sounds more glorious than it is in a company of 130,000 people. There seems to be a lot of people with the CTO title. Yeah. But to tell you the truth, what my team really does is we have a series of technical engineers that really help enable our partnerships. And so when we think about the Microsoft partner ecosystem, it's over 13,000 partners in Canada alone, so massive. We spend time with a lot of our top partners to really help them. Some of them where they're just getting started, we're trying to help light them up with the right technical expertise, the right go-to-market expertise, and then help them sometimes in that sales journey, and so that they can really advance their business.
That's great, yeah. And Microsoft is one of those companies I looked at that's transformed itself many times. Like you mentioned how long you've been there and just the amount of change in employees that you've had. And I think everyone's got a history with Microsoft if you grew up in infrastructure or data center or, even just started using, computers back in the day. Our partnership is, if you look at what we do is we've got many different partners and we kind of describe them in our ecosystem. And we're finding we're doing a ton of work in Azure nowadays. A lot of our customers are financial services, telcos, government, things like that. And it's nice we show up and they've got an Azure account ready and we can get to work like the old days of putting requests in and begging for servers. So it really changes the game.
For sure.
What kind of partners is Microsoft looking for these days? Obviously, you've got your traditional ones that you've been with for a long time, but what's you're looking for to
there's a couple of dimensions. Like you said, Kyle, we have our traditional partners, there's software resellers or our classic system integrators that do work, the big global guys. There's a number of different partners in the ecosystem that are all building IP and software. As you know, startups is a rich ecosystem in Canada, especially in places like Toronto and Waterloo, where there seems to be high amount of venture capital investment in this area as well. And so those are kind of the partnerships we really look for, is the guys that are doing innovative things. We like guys like what Arctiq's doing, especially around open source, right? Think about how big Microsoft's open source ecosystem is, especially under Satya, who's really changed the company and kind of really what he said, look, we're not about an operating system company. We're about really the experiences. And so that, I think, has really kind of changed the way we've operated as a company under his leadership.
Yeah, and I find it great that I would say we started out with a partnership with Microsoft just to get something going. And it was a slow start, and just to be frank, because we didn't really have a good plan. And Tanner, who's our partner guy in Toronto, who's been great because he really came to the table and didn't just try to do the same old thing. He actually recognized that our business model was very different and very new, and it was going to require just some different type of conversations and finding the right programs that work for us, and not just trying to say, well, this is how everyone else is doing it, because we were very allergic to the conversation of, well, this is how everyone else is doing it, this is how you need to fit in. So it's been great working with him and his team to kind of, just get creative with this stuff, because our customers are acting differently, they want to be sold to differently, just the whole game kind of has changed, and it's continuing to change. And you mentioned open source, and Microsoft has a very long history of open source if you go and look it up, but I think from a awareness and marketing perspective, it's just coming to bear. How big of a thing is it inside Microsoft now, open source, and how much of it is ingrained in that culture?
You know what? I would say in the old Microsoft, there was probably more affinity to make sure things were everything was first party on Microsoft. And kind of the new Microsoft, obviously there's, 3 hyperscale cloud platforms, and, Microsoft is doing fairly well in terms of their market share, which is why you're seeing customer demand and ask you kind of, how do we put this on Azure? From a mentality perspective, there isn't really these, we don't really care if it's Red Hat. We don't care if they're using, Kubernetes. We don't care what technologies it is. In fact, VMware is coming onto our platform and doing it in terms of lift and shift. So there's this really independence of technology. Really, ultimately, we want to get the best experience for the customer. And we're fortunate that 95% of these Fortune 500 companies are already running on Microsoft, which is really good, which is probably why you're also seeing some demand. So I would say that mentality has really changed. And it started with, a lot of companies that Satch has really acquired. They've been open source based companies. GitHub, one of the largest acquisitions we made, really tied to the open source community. And even I think you guys do some things with Red Hat and others. Look at what that partnerships, or the partnerships that we've had with those guys. I think I talked to you a little bit about some of that stuff, Kyle, in terms of, Red Hat's actually as we move in more and more of our transactions into our own marketplace, Red Hat actually is one of those largest suppliers on our own marketplace.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned Red Hat being one of your partners. They've been one of our big partners. And, when I look at cloud providers today, a lot of times you figure out the business model around cloud is just straight up consumption. So it's like a utility. It's like you're going to pay for power or water. And a lot of it's about enablement, right? So do whatever you can to enable that customer to be successful. Come to your cloud and leverage your services, and then you kind of all win. I think Microsoft's got a unique position around two things, like the software stack that you guys also have that's been traditional, like probably bought software with contracts, and now the ability just to be able to go in and consume that by the hour and try and fail, and just like being able to have database as a service, all these other kind of application modernizations, but then also being able to leverage like Marketplace to deploy something like Openshift or some of these other security ecosystem tools. So from a business perspective, how important is that, and how much do you guys talk about the marketplace? And I kind of describe that as like, what's the front door for people and developers to come and consume your services without it always having to be a long sales cycle? How much is part of that of the strategy do you guys think about and talk about?
That is a big part of Microsoft's strategy, to effectively have the equivalent of the App Store for the commercial world, which we're seeing a lot of traction on. Because what happens behind the scenes is, a company like yourself may want to go work with a financial institution, and maybe they're not using some of these products. You don't want them to have to go through traditional procurement, procure all this out. Microsoft's already taken care of all of that and made it easy through one click, no different than any other app store. It just makes it frictionless for a lot of the engineering companies that you may work. And on the other side is maybe a lot of these companies already are using technology. I mentioned Red Hat, I mentioned VMware, I mentioned a bunch of these. It's an easy transition if they don't want to go use a lot of the native technologies. It might be an easier transition for them to kind of just graduate that way and then be able to procure whatever they need to procure. So it's about making it easier for the customer experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I always find nowadays, these like SaaS services and things like that customers are adopting, get them moving very fast. They get us to production quicker, but still someone's got to support that. And how do you find customers are dealing with the new kind of like SRE concepts and the concept of you're managing application more than you're managing data center infrastructure anymore.
Sure.
But it's still not a complete old school managed service where there's a number to call and you manage an SLA. It's really a joint game. And are you finding customers are catching on to that, or is it difficult?
No, for sure. That is one of the biggest opportunities for our whole partner ecosystem, because in general, our customers aren't able to move as fast. If you're in tech, Microsoft's a software company, they get it. A lot of our partners are software companies, they get that piece. If you are a traditional bank, you may not. You have a lot of these infrastructure people. You've been supporting it in a certain way, like the ITIL model, and so to move to an agile DevOps model, it's not something they're quite used to. And we need partnerships like yourselves to help our customers to be able to do that faster. There's just not enough talent in the marketplace to help support that. That is the biggest opportunity by far. Most of these customers have a lot of what you just call traditional infrastructure folks versus hardcore system engineers that could help automate, think about process automation. That's what's really needed in the marketplace.
Yeah. And it's a lot of it turns into like an enablement exercise. And we've been able to kind of grow our business without a traditional like sales force that's carrying like a quota and comp model, and any deal's a deal. We're pretty picky, we're lucky to be able to be picky on what projects we work on and keep in our wheelhouse. And I always say, like, if we try to do everything, we'll just get mediocre at everything, and we won't be known for
sure.
like being the best at what we're doing. And I think a lot of the stuff is like teach these customers like these new technologies and let them, enable them. So it's not just about going this traditional training course. It's like, if we're going to do a project with you, come along and be in part of that project, be in that room and learn. You're not going to know everything, but you're going to pick up an awful lot. And I do find a lot of our customers now are putting the right investments into like their budgeting side of a project, because most of our customers do have, everyone's managing their time via some project code or something like that. And if there's no project code, well, people can't go spend time. So making sure the internal kind of push is done is really critical. And the other part of that is getting, we aren't out hunting for business that much. We get a lot of our leads and synergies with working with the Microsoft team. So just having those conversations with your technical teams, but also the account execs, and having regular sync ups on accounts. A lot of synergies happen, and the amazing part is it's changed because we don't focus on resale. So that world's changed a lot, because now we're all going in, we all have the same motivations, and most of it's around, if the customer's going to be successful, well, it's going to drive Azure consumption. It's going to drive more services for us. It's going to drive more word of mouth. Do you find that, is that happening a lot, or is that still kind of a niche thing that some of the smaller companies are doing?
Absolutely. I would say that's happening. So think about what the world's happening with cloud, software as a service. Imagine I just told you 95% of our Fortune 500 customers are already running the cloud. If they've already got the procurement vehicles in place, they've already got access to all the services, there isn't really a resale motion anymore, right? It's just really a consumption motion now, right? And so that is absolutely happening. When you're in this consumption motion, then, this is what I've been saying to a lot of the folks. It's really switching from our software companies used to have these big sales force around selling the license. It's really moving to understanding, how do we get the customers to adopt and best use it. And a lot of times, you're touching on a point, is it's almost, how are you teaching these guys to become almost like a software engineering company, because they're just not used to having that. I'll throw one quick stat, like, if you think about the auto industry, right? In North America, the average auto company only has 1% of their whole labor force is tied to system engineering. But you look at Tesla, on average, it's 6%. And look at the difference in experience. So that just kind of tells you how much of that workforce is switching in the new digital world to system engineering, which then means you need a lot more companies to help kind of teach them that and how to get them there faster.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And how do you find the traditional VAR kind of like key partners? Are they the interesting part is we work with a lot of them today. So instead of it being I find a lot of our partnerships are very ecosystem driven. There's always room for us to come in and work. Again, if we're not doing the resale and we don't have that collide on some of that. But we're working with a lot of traditional VAR resellers to help, complement them, because they're close to the customer.
Absolutely.
And it's more of, a lot of it's a business journey for them. How do you see them catching up or partnering? Like, what do you see?
It's both, actually. What I see them doing is, as you mentioned, they've got this massive sales force. They've got this massive reach into a lot of our customers, because they've just built that up over decades, right? And so they've built a business on reselling hardware, reselling software, which is why they have that reach. For them, they have the same struggle, though, as no different than the other customers. They can't move as fast as they would like to around their system engineering capabilities. So I do see a dual prong approach to try and figure out, do we acquire companies? Do we build some of it internally? And then part of it, in the meantime, we just got to meet this customer demand. So how do we partner more with other companies to kind of just service what the customer needs?
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see some of these partnerships, because these partnerships are, if you look at them at the surface, they're really big organizations that have done well. You mentioned like Red Hat and even, I guess that brings in IBM and Microsoft, that were traditional very much rivals. I mean, in many business units, they still are very much rivals. But I think what's changed is you can't afford not to cooperate, because that's what the customer wants and needs you to do. So the old days of, well, you're either going to buy mine or theirs are kind of gone. You have to let the customer make the decision, build better software, build better services, and hopefully differentiate yourself. But at the end of the day, you need to be at the table enabling some of these other partners and technologies. Are you confident in the future of that, or do you think as cloud becomes more commoditized and there's more than three players, or will more competition drum up, or where do you think
You know what?
that'll end?
Honestly, I don't think there will be. In fact, it's probably even more consolidation because when it comes to hypercloud, the barrier to entry actually is so high. And then if you look at things like there's more regulation being put in, regulation actually doesn't help the market. In some ways, it actually creates more barriers to the market, right? And so to your point, I actually don't know that there will be more than three hyperscale players. It just happens to be those three players happen to be in the top 5 in market cap in the world, right?
Yeah. And with some big differences between them, just based on getting to market first. But it's amazing to see Azure catching up and just the consumption going there. What do you think was the key to that? Because it's you see our customers. It's hard to get a cloud contract in order just to even be able to play around. It's been it's taken a couple years for a lot of especially the financial services side. What's been key to Microsoft just getting that market share? Because they weren't first to market with Azure.
No.
It was I'm sure you learned a lot from the first. If we look at AWS as being the leader in that space, it's not always bad to be second or third, because you come in with some things you learned along the way from others. But do you have thoughts on that and how that's going to change?
So look, they had probably a 6-year head start of Microsoft in terms of from a technology perspective. Their strategy was a little bit different in terms of where they're focused. In fact, they have focused a lot on media, entertainment, consumer-based companies, and rightly so, because even back 10 years ago, a lot of commercial companies weren't adopting the cloud. One of the things that really kind of helped Microsoft when you think about it is not only did we have our platform as a service, but our software as a service offerings such as Office 365. That really was our entry point into a lot of the customers. Pretty well all the customers are using Office in some way. They're using Office 365. So getting through that was really the barrier that helped unblock cloud in a lot of these commercial customers. And then you ended up with these agreements, and you've already you've laid the foundation, because the last thing that a lot of these CIOs wanted to do was, hey, I don't want to run 20 mail servers. Why am I running a bunch of mail servers, right? I don't want to run a bunch of another 20 servers to also do archiving of mail. So, that was the first thing they were like, hey, I need to get rid of all these things. Microsoft happened to have that service and did it very well. And so that was really the entry that kind of broke into a lot of these commercial customers. And I would say that if you looked at from purely a revenue perspective, Amazon had a lead. They're doing a lot of things in a lot of other, I'd say, consumer-based areas. But Microsoft's got a lot of strength in the commercial and the enterprise space.
Yeah, even just running the Office, right? I guess. And we were all comfortable with our mail in the cloud by that point. So makes a lot of sense that when it took time to do that commercial agreement, it might have been for 365, but it also included Azure services. And when you were ready, you could just consume them, rather than someone trying to come along and say, I want to use your ML engine and put all my credit card data in cloud and do analytics on it and things.
Absolutely.
People are like, whoa, slow down. We got to talk about that and slow down a little bit. If we look at the customer, obviously you're dealing with many different verticals, it sounds like, from smaller to like up to the enterprise side. What have you seen? And a lot of them we work with are just starting, or some of them have pockets that have done really well and accelerated things. What do you think the key, top kind of 3 things that's made people successful? And then on the other side of that, what do you think's been holding
from a customer
back?
perspective or from a partner perspective?
From a customer perspective, partners are part of that, but until the customer's kind of like gets their foundation in order and makes the right commitments, it's tough to push them along.
Yeah, what's interesting is what really always pushes somebody is there's some compelling event, right? And if you think about the banking industry, and I know a lot of the execs do this, they have a lot of strategic sessions because they're thinking about what is the technology is going to disrupt them. In the boardroom, they're talking about conversations all the time. Is Google Pay and Apple Pay going to disrupt our credit card business, right? They're like, is another big tech player like an Amazon coming into my financials and going to offer retail banking at some point?
Or even a small one, like a small fintech.
So they're constantly thinking of those scenarios, which has caused them to accelerate their journey. Especially, in Canada, you got 5 major banks. They're all thinking that way about how to accelerate that digital journey. And so there's nothing like having to be afraid to actually accelerate that journey. And I see that's kind of what's caused it in the last 5 years for them to really jump into that. And then, I think the question is, you may have that at the executive level and be thinking that, but it's a different reality on how you translate that into the execution level down at the bottom. So the ones that give some more fluidity and agility around empowerment and how they actually do that, they're the ones that are being very successful.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, top-down projects go a certain way, and I think when you're dealing with emerging tech, it certainly helps because it's an uncomfortable place for a lot of this, call it the sysadmin teams, to be in when we're bringing in new platforms like Kubernetes and the learning curve is so high. I do find there's many cases, like probably more three and a half, 4 years ago when we kind of started out and got into Kubernetes, was some people just wanted Kubernetes. It was hot enough, we needed containers. And now what people are realizing is it's more of a business result I need. So you get a lot of line of businesses coming in and funding and pushing these projects around. And it's because they need to release software faster to address some of the exact stuff that you've just mentioned, like market disruption and being able to meet market events and stuff like that is critical. One of the other ones we run into a lot that I think is often overlooked is security.
Absolutely.
Do you see a lot of people focusing on security now and looking at cloud as a way to kind of start over and put controls in place?
Absolutely. I mean, just to add on to that is, in Office 365, I mentioned that example. There's a whole set of security requirements which helped us, but that's still different than some of the other security requirements, like with the example you just said about putting your customer data right up into the cloud versus the conversations in email. And so there's a whole set of security and compliance. One of the things that I love is, Microsoft really is built around trust. That's what Satya Nadell's whole theme has always been, is we need to start from a trustworthy position. And so I really love the way he takes that stance. And, if you've read kind of Brad Smith's book, it talks about kind of privacy first and all those other implications and how we think about it. So I do think Microsoft takes a very trustworthy stance first, which then kind of, especially the Fortune 500 companies, they really like that kind of that mantra. And so the other thing that I think would be slightly different from a Microsoft perspective is we are a software company first. Like that is what we do. We have to build trust in our software from the ground up. It's not a second thing. We're not in an advertising business. We're not in online commerce. We're not in those other real businesses. Our first primary business is cloud, right? And software.
One mistake will get you too.
For sure.
You're only as good as your last kind of project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or what you've rolled out.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Satya a bit, and I hear his name come up a lot, and he's certainly done a lot for Microsoft. I mean, he's out in the press, and he's talking and doing the things he has to do as a CEO. But can you talk about I don't work for Microsoft. I don't get into the, but I know a lot of people who work there. A couple of my friends have recently gone there from other companies, and I hear his name specifically, and he can't be everywhere, but the way I translate that is into culture.
Absolutely.
So I think what my impression is he's been a great effect on Microsoft's culture through this really disruptional time period we've gone through. And this is not a small workforce. This is a worldwide workforce. What have been the key couple things that, if we're giving advice to some other CEOs in Canada that are pushing the envelope, and you've been at Microsoft a while, so you've seen, you almost go back to the days when we had Bomber dancing on stage and launching.
I've been there
developers.
even when Bill was the CEO, then Bomber's been the CEO, and now Satya the CEO in the last 5 years. So So
what's he done? What's he doing that's so critical that's helping people along?
You hit the nail right on the head. It's the culture piece. That is the piece that's so critical on trying to change a company. And I would say 5 years ago, he's done a lot of that groundwork with the engineering teams, which then has allowed him to kind of see, because you always have to start with, if you're at a product company, you got to start with engineering and work your way backwards out.
That's true,
So I think he's done a great job there to do that and make it pervasive across, like what you said, it's not easy to do across 130,000 employees, right? So I think that will be an HBR case study for years to come.
Yeah. And is it that he got people to focus on the customer journey first? Is it a get stuff out of the way, don't let process hold you up in our business, let's push forward? Like, is there a couple key things that you've seen that have really differentiated it? That would have made a difference from someone else coming in?
So I think that in the engineering culture, the customer centricity culture obviously kind of shows, where it's like, we don't really care it's open source or if it's us, right? So those types of things, I think those elements. I think the culture that he's really created around, and we've changed kind of even our own internal review system. Everybody's measured around results, but there's actually two other equal bubbles in terms of how you're leveraging others and then how you're actually helping others. And so that whole being in our culture and that three bubble system is actually just one element of the culture things that he's changed, right? To make it's all about team, us, versus a me kind of thing, right? And so I think that those are all elements that he's put in.
Yeah, that's great. And it's also, I don't see a lot of the old days of, but I guess what we talked about earlier is Microsoft's not going out and saying we're better than this person or the other. It's really about enablement, partnership, customer first. I mean, it's an easy motto to kind of build a business off of. If you deliver for your customers and take a customer first approach, it's kind of overused, but it is pretty damn true. I mean, good things should happen if you're doing the right things, and it doesn't always go smooth, but it's much of it is how you stand up and follow through with what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
So personally, how are you dealing with the velocity of all of just the pace? I guess if you look back to Microsoft when you first started and the release cycles and how many pieces of software and options to all the stuff going on in open source and cloud and migration and all these transformation. How personally do you keep up with the pace of everything?
I'll tell you, that's almost impossible. I pretty well know I can't. There's 220 services plus alone in Azure, right?
Wow.
And so
220.
So there and changing daily, right? Depending on how much they're releasing on every release. And so I think it's just impossible. For me, we're in my role right now, because I don't code anymore. I don't get into that level of depth anymore. It's more about understanding a lot of those different architectural patterns through. And I'm fortunate to have 40 engineers underneath me that I can actually work with daily and understand those patterns and then pick it up by osmosis, quite honestly. So that's for, your question about how do you keep up. I'm fortunate that I get to work with a lot of technical engineers and get to understand it from their perspective and get to absorb a lot of those patterns.
Yeah, so I'm sure much of it's just about enabling your team, getting them out in front of more customers. I find that even nowadays as our team grows, much of my job is to just make it easier for our team to be successful than just being the one to do the work, right? That's how you scale. That's how you, deliver a better customer experience.
And just to build on that, because I'll tie that into what you were saying about Satya earlier. I mean, he's got a core set of leadership principles that we all follow, which ties to the one that we just said. The three leadership principles are: how do you really create clarity for your people in the field on the things that they need to do and prioritize? How do we make sure we're always generating that energy? And if you're doing those two really well, the results are going to happen. So the outcomes will happen if you're doing those things really well.
Yeah, and then how do you guys measure all of these new kind of points that are going to be triggers on your business? Because obviously being able to manage this over a large data set and be able to look at these trends, because not everything can be managed down to the human level. Are there things that you think we would give advice to some of our customers? Because we've got like a whole new generation of workforce coming in. It's a different mindset than I had, a different mindset that you had when you were started. Is there metrics that go along with that, or is it really just it's the culture thing and it's built inside the company and you can't really measure it too much? I struggle with this one sometimes too.
So the difference between kind of now and before, if you think about old Microsoft and the old world, is you sold licenses, but you had no idea if they were ever being used.
Yeah, that's true.
In the cloud world, you know exactly what's being used and how it's being used, and you can quickly identify the patterns of that. I think the question is, do you have the technology and the pieces already in there? So because you can't use just humans to do this anymore. So do you have the right machine learning algorithms? Do you have everything in the telemetry that allows you to do that? If you're a publicly traded company, as an example, you have an obligation to Wall Street, to also to shareholders and to analysts. To give you one example, we've eliminated things like that in the field of doing things like forecasting. So in a big publicly traded company, you would actually have to go down to, we used to have this rigorous process. You'd go down and figure out what the sales managers, sales directors, people roll it all up into your systems and come up with
take your fluff rate.
Yeah, and this is what we would think the street is. But now with kind of the stuff moving to the cloud and how much digital, we actually don't rely on humans to do that anymore. We rely on machinery to really tell us that. And by the way, it's way more accurate than anything we ever did with the people.
Yeah, I mean, it's real time at that point too, right? Like Friday sales forecast calls turn into Monday like reports.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess when you look at the real time aspects of that, just market events and world events can almost change the needle as far as consumption goes.
For sure.
Big weather event is going to happen, and a certain company is going to crunch their numbers on Azure. That's a big workload coming up, and the ebbs and flows that go along with all that.
In a way, you're hedged as a hyperscale player, though, when you're in 70 plus countries too, from some of these things.
Yeah, I mean that one's interesting. A lot of our customers are in many countries, and they're also looking for providers that are in those, especially in Europe and stuff where they've got data like has to stay in country. So they're thinking like, great, I build something in one cloud, but if I can't port that to another one, so people are, this hybrid cloud story is a real one right now. And are you finding customers are picking kind of two of the hyperscalers?
Most companies are multi-cloud, and whether it's for business reasons, maybe it's psychological reasons. They just feel I'm more comfortable being within a couple players.
Thing too.
Yeah, it could be negotiation. So I'd say most companies usually have two players. Most of the big companies. If you're a SaaS company, though, as an example, you probably don't. Why? Because you're building your software on one cloud. Why would I have two engineering organizations that are learning to? It just costs you twice as much. So there are scenarios where, like, hey, maybe I'm a software company, I'm a startup, I'm building my software. I'm probably going to pick one or the other. Now, it's easy for them to switch early because most of them are not using what I'd say is the high order cloud services.
Yeah. They're
really using the lower constructs, right? And so it's pretty easy to kind of move between the two, but generally they'll stay with one in those types of scenarios. And there's other scenarios that are like that might cause that.
Yeah, I say a lot of times, like, it's great to have a multi-cloud strategy but like, get something done. Like, pick something.
Yeah.
Calculate your exit costs, make some educated decisions, but get moving, right? Because we get stuck in these scenarios of I'm going to like contemplate the world, and then your competitors are passing you by.
Yeah, for sure.
We're seeing a lot more of that of let's just get started, but I do find the cloud providers that bring the right people to the table and are there to enable the customers and help them like along the way and just reduce that burden of getting started are being very successful. But it's a higher touch sale.
For sure.
In that way, it's way more about results than kind of relationships are still kind of like number one important, I would still say. But I think just the way the sellers need to learn to treat customers is a pretty big dynamic too. And you see different approaches from people who have been doing it a long time in the market versus someone who's kind of fresh. And new ideas are good, I think, in a certain way. Well, great. Before we lead off, what are you excited about for the next few years with Microsoft? And like, what do you think are going to be a couple things to watch out for, technology-wise and event-wise, that our customers and other partners like us should be thinking about?
The big thing that worries me a lot, that keeps me up at night, is just around the skills that are required, right? And so you think about how fast this digital economy is moving, whether it's transitioning those analog systems to digital, analog processes to digital. It's causing us to move It's causing us to move at super high speed. Because of that, is we don't have enough skills in Canada. So that's what keeps me up a lot at night about thinking about over the next couple of years, how are we going to bring the skills into? And it's not just an obligation for the technology companies, but also everybody in Canada. How do we think through that?
Yeah, and it's. I guess we start at the schools and we start there. Like it is something that you don't want to overlook. Like I've got 3 young kids myself, and my oldest is 10. But I do think about like, what are they going to want to do when they get older? And is there, at what point not to say like kind of forcing, but at what point do I start to enable them to get a view of technology and maybe see if they like going down that road? Because it's hard to judge. Like my kids can work my iPads and phones and TVs better than my wife and even me in some cases. So that part's just like they're born with it. But the stuff around like enablement and actually like I think the real value comes from being able to take a business problem and describe it and be able to agree on what it is and then apply technology to it. And it's hard to find someone who can do both. Those are like, that takes experience and more of a special personality. But the people who can take that business problem, translate it into tech, and then actually push a team to get it done and get it out the door
that's gold.
Yeah, that's gold. And it's still very grassrooted at people, relationships, getting along with people, compromise, negotiation, all those core skills that sometimes we worry are going to go away with all this technology around us.
It's all, right? I call it all the consultative soft skills. You kind of need that as the trifecta. Yeah.
Cool. So anything else exciting?
That's the biggest thing. I mean, technology. It's amazing the scenarios that are coming up. I happen to get a view into the startup world, which is very exciting, and seeing all the things and the ideas. Like, it's just amazing. I think Canada is just ripe to kind of take off. So I'm really excited about that. We're really becoming the Silicon Valley of the North. I feel.
True. You hear about that.
So you hear that a lot about, and especially with what's going on in the U.S., you're seeing almost the talent come here more so than the U.S., right? And so,
well, now we have an NBA championship too. So the Bay Area,
we're on the map. Actually, we have my role in like all the different geographies, and we get together. And so it was interesting to hear from my German counterpart and French counterpart that they actually watched the NBA and knew what was going on in Toronto. So to your point, we're on the map globally because of that too now.
Yeah, cool. And I think Toronto, just being such a multicultural city, we have so much talent here and just so much different perspective. It's cool. We're hosting a meetup tonight in the area. Wow. I think we have like 70 people signed up, and it's all going to be demo focused. And I love going to these things. I meet a ton of people. You get people that have done it, people that are super new to it, and they're like, I heard these are good. I want to learn. So it's that community aspect of what we do, and I really enjoy that because it's not, project and delivery is awesome, but this is a way to just kind of get out in the community and get a pulse of what's going on. And we usually, great way to recruit talent too, because the people that are there are interested in learning. So that's already the right kind of mindset that we're looking for.
By the way, that's the right thing. It's how do you light up the community, which is also why I think Satya is brilliant in acquiring GitHub, because where else do you have a community of developers that big in one single place, right? And so to your point, it is community helps drive a lot of this. Yeah,
and just to close things off, we've been a GitHub partner for a long time, and I remember when the acquisition went through, you get a whole bunch of people that start on Reddit, and they're moving their repos to GitLab and all of this. And I think very quickly Microsoft made a statement that we're going to let this company operate the way it's going to operate. It's working great. Yeah. It's a community. It's an open source fabric. Microsoft's going to enable tools and all kinds of stuff. And it's been well over a year now, I got to think, or close to it. And it does not feel any different. People I work with at GitHub, my interactions with it are the same. If anything, they switched to free repos. Now you have free private repos, which we never had before. So, really cool. And it just goes back to like, if you say something, just do it. And it's not that easy sometimes, but I think Microsoft's really doing that. And it's certainly showing in the market. So really cool chatting with you today.
Good, Kyle.
We're looking forward to the partnership and doing more cool things. So.
Thank you, Kyle.
So keep an eye out. I think we're going to record our meetup tonight and post up all the talks. We got some cool stuff. There's, I think we're demoing some ARO stuff, which is Azure Openshift service that has come up in the last few months. It's getting a lot of traction. So check our website, and we'll post up those blogs, and keep an eye out for some more Fireside Chats.
That's great.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye.